The Recorder Part 1. The Weight of Silence, Fort Kelton, Arizona, 9:47 p.m. The room smelled like rubber mat and copper. 4 people were on the floor. One was pressing what remained of the function of his right hand against his chest, fingers bent at angles that fingers were never meant to hold. One was slumped against the door with both hands at his throat, chest heaving with the labored rhythm of someone learning to breathe through damage. The other 2 were still not unconscious, but the kind of still that comes when the body has processed enough information to stop arguing with the situation. In the center of the room, a woman stood. She was not tall, 5'3", maybe 5'4" on a good day, 119 pounds, brown hair pulled back, gray PT-shirt with a dark stain spreading from the collar. The stain was not hers. In her left hand, a smartphone with a cracked corner. Screen locked, upload interrupted at 41%. In her right hand, a device the size of a deck of cards. Matte black casing worn at the corners from years of careful handling. A single red LED on the side blinking at the slow, patient rhythm of a machine that had been doing exactly what it was built to do. The LED had been blinking for 14 minutes. On the floor near the south wall, a camera on a tripod lens still aimed at the metal chair in the center of the room. On a bench near the east wall, a tablet computer face down. Embedded in the wall above the door, a security camera whose timestamp had been manually adjusted every Thursday evening for 3 consecutive years. Outside the door, someone was running. The woman did not move. She looked at the red LED. Then she looked at the man on the floor who was still holding his hand. Then she looked at the door. Her expression was not satisfaction. It was not relief. It was something harder to name, the particular stillness of a person who has spent a long time walking toward a specific moment and has finally arrived at it and found that it was exactly what she expected. Her name was Victoria Harmon. She was 27 years old. And to understand what she was doing in that room on that night in the Arizona desert, you have to go back 16 years. You have to go back to a man named Gerald Harmon and a device he carried in the left breast pocket of his uniform through 2 deployments and 1 classified operation in a divided city that no longer existed the way it used to. You have to go back to what he left behind. Gerald Harmon enlisted at 18. He was built the way certain men from certain parts of the Pacific Northwest are built, lean through the torso, quiet through the shoulders, with hands designed for gripping and eyes designed for measuring distance. He passed Bud/S at 22. He served for 24 years. He was skilled at the parts of the job that do not appear in official photographs. In 1988, he was 23 years old and attached to a joint intelligence support operation in West Berlin, working under a senior chief named Marcus Cole. The operation had no formal name. The paperwork, to the extent paperwork existed at all, described it as a training liaison exchange. What it actually was did not require a name. It only required results. Cole was 32 that year. He had been running operations in divided Europe for 7 years, long enough to understand what the Cold War actually was beneath the doctrine and the rhetoric. It was not a conflict between ideologies. It was a conflict between record keepers. Whoever could document what the other side was doing and do it in a way that survived attempts to erase it held the advantage. Digital systems, Cole understood, were vulnerable in ways their designers had not fully appreciated. They could be wiped. They could be corrupted. They could be accessed remotely and altered without a trace. But magnetic tape running at the right speed through the right mechanism captured sound in a form that could not be hacked because there was nothing to hack. It was physics. It was irreversible. It was the most honest technology that human beings had ever produced. Cole carried a recording device that year, small enough to disappear inside a jacket lining, sensitive enough to capture a whispered conversation across a 10-foot room. No wireless signal, no digital signature, no electromagnetic footprint that opposing intelligence could detect or trace. He used it twice in Berlin, both recordings held in subsequent proceedings. Gerald Harmon watched him work. He asked the right questions. He understood at 23 that what Cole was teaching him was not technique, but philosophy, the belief that truth properly documented was more durable than any system designed to suppress it. When the operation concluded and Gerald rotated back to Coronado, Cole pressed the device into his hands on the tarmac before they went to separate flights. "Keep it," Cole told him. "You'll know when to use it." Gerald kept it for 22 years. He carried it through 2 more deployments. He kept it in the left breast pocket of his uniform jacket through the years when Victoria was small enough to fall asleep against his shoulder on the couch, through her high school graduation, through the phone call when she told him she was going to attempt Bud/S and waited for him to argue. He did not argue. He did not tell her she couldn't. He said, "I know a man who can help you train." That man was Marcus Cole, retired by then, living 40 minutes from Coronado, still willing to run people into the ground at 4 in the morning if he believed they had something worth developing. Cole had trained alongside Gerald for 7 years across 3 continents. He had watched Gerald become the kind of operator that institutions produced rarely and recognized even more rarely. When Gerald called and said his daughter wanted to go to BUD/S, Cole said to send her on a Tuesday and to have her ready to suffer. She was ready. She was more than ready. What Cole discovered in those months before Bud/S and confirmed during the weeks of the course itself was that Victoria Harmon had inherited from her father not just the physical capacity for endurance, but something less quantifiable, the ability to keep thinking clearly while the body was using everything it had just to continue. Gerald Harmon deployed to Kunar Province, Afghanistan in March 2010. Victoria was 22 years old. He sat across from her at the kitchen table the night before his flight and placed the device between them without explanation, because the explanation had already been given across 22 years of small lessons and demonstrated values. She picked it up, lighter than she expected. Use it only when the mission cannot be done any other way, he told her, and only when innocent lives depend on it. She started to hand it back. He shook his head. I won't be needing it where I'm going. He was right. He did not come back from Kunar Province. The citation mentioned extraordinary valor and decisive action under fire. The folded flag went to his wife, Carolyn. The device stayed with Victoria in a fireproof box under her bed through the rest of Bud/S, through her first assignment, through the years when she told herself she was building cases with the tools she had been given and that this was enough. She carried it to Fort Kelton because she had run out of other ways to do enough. The NCIS field office in San Diego was not a dramatic place. Fluorescent lights, institutional carpet, the particular silence of a building where the work inside it was too serious for ambient noise. Diana Cross had been a special agent for 19 years. She had the posture of someone who had delivered difficult information many times and had learned that the most efficient delivery was direct and unornamented. She set a manila folder on the table between them. 47 anonymous reports, she said. Fort Kelton, Arizona, over 36 months. All female, all enlisted, E1 through E3, ages 18 to 23. Victoria looked at the folder without opening it. The pattern is consistent, Cross continued. Subjects volunteer for a program called Shadow Cell, officially designated as Advanced Interrogation Resistance Training. The program is not registered with any branch command above the base level. Subjects enter. 6 months later, they rotate out on medical discharge or psychological evaluation referrals. 2 attempted suicides, 1 successful. Victoria opened the folder. The pages were thick, each one a life interrupted. She read ages that had not been redacted, unit designations, dates of entry into Shadow Cell, dates of subsequent medical rotation. She read the pattern the way she had been trained to read patterns, not for the individual details, but for the shape of the thing beneath the details. The shape was deliberate, organized, patient. It had been running long enough to develop the confidence that comes from 3 years without successful prosecution. Cross slid a photograph across the table. A cinder block building in desert terrain, a single steel door, no windows. They film everything, Cross said. Use the footage for leverage. Most subjects never report because they are told the program is standard, that everyone goes through it, that discomfort is part of the training process. The ones who do report find that their complaint files disappear in administrative processing. She paused. 3 separate complaints reached the base commander. All 3 are gone. Victoria looked at the building in the photograph, at the steel door, at the absence of windows. Who is running it, she said. Staff Sergeant Derek Rains, Army Ranger, 12 years of service, described by every performance review as a natural leader. Cross produced a second photograph. A man in his late 30s, lean in the functional way of distance runners, sandy hair, regulation cut, blue eyes that read as warm in official photographs. Victoria looked at the eyes for a long time. There was a precise distance between what the eyes showed and what they measured. She had seen it before in other people in other contexts. It was the expression of someone who had learned to use approachability as infrastructure. He has helped, Cross continued. At least 3 confirmed. They rotate security, manage the recording equipment, handle recruitment. It is methodical. It has been running for 3 years without a single successful prosecution because every time a complaint reaches the right desk, it stops reaching the right desk. Victoria set down the photograph. You want me undercover. We need evidence that holds in a court-martial. You go in as a CQB contractor. Navy liaison for inter-service training. Your cover is clean. No one at Fort Kelton above the base commander knows your NCIS affiliation. You observe, you document, you build the case. Cross pulled out the final section of the folder. She did not look at Victoria when she slid it across the table. Evidence photographs, standard documentation. Victoria moved through them with methodical attention. Personal effects, fabric samples. And then her hand stopped moving. A bracelet, turquoise beads on a leather cord. The leather was handmade. She knew this because she had watched the person who made it sitting on a barracks floor at Camp Lejeune threading beads with the focused attention of someone who wanted to create something beautiful in a place built entirely from concrete and utility. Her voice when she spoke did not change register. When was this taken? Cross's expression moved into something careful. April 2021. The subject was on temporary duty assignment at Fort Kelton. She filed a complaint 2 days before she died. The complaint was processed into the administrative system and subsequently removed. Cross paused. The subject's name was Private First Class Lily Harmon, United States Marine Corps. Victoria did not move for several seconds. The room pressed in the way rooms press when the information inside them becomes too dense for the available air. Lily had never told her. Not a word about Fort Kelton, not a word about Shadow Cell or any of it. She had sent a text at 3 in the morning on April 28th. They filmed me. Everyone does it. I can't make it stop. I'm sorry, Vic. By the time Victoria reached the hospital, her sister had been gone for 4 hours. The doctor said it was quick. The chaplain said she was at peace. Victoria had not found either piece of information useful. She had stood at Arlington in dress whites with a folded flag and the particular quality of rain that only falls in Virginia in late spring, and she had made a promise over fresh-turned earth in Section 60, the section where they buried the recent dead from recent wars. She had not known then what she was promising against. She knew now. When do I leave, Victoria said. 72 hours, Cross said. Your cover will be established by then. Victoria stood. She picked up the photograph of the bracelet and held it for one moment. Then she set it back on the table, squared the folder's edges, and walked to the door without looking back. There was nothing left to say. She left before Cross could try to say it anyway. Arlington was quiet at 4 in the afternoon. The tourists were gone. Section 60 stretched in neat rows of white marble, each stone the same height, each one containing, inside its carved letters, an entire life compressed into dates and rank, and a name that someone somewhere still said aloud at night. Victoria walked the path from memory. 7th row, 14th stone, PFC Lily Harmon, United States Marine Corps, 1999-2021, beloved daughter and sister. She knelt. The grass was still damp from morning. She placed her hand flat against the stone and felt the cold of it move through her palm immediately, the way this particular stone always transferred cold in every season, in every weather she had visited it. She did not say much. She never did hear. The marble was not Lily. The words carved into it were not Lily. But it was the place where the distance between them was smallest, and so this was where she came when the distance needed to be crossed. I found the room, she said. I'm going in. The wind moved through the trees along the row. The world continued operating on its ordinary schedule, indifferent and intact. Victoria traced her finger along the carved letters of her sister's name. She stayed long enough to say what needed to be said. Then she stood. She straightened her jacket. She turned and walked back toward the parking area. She did not look back because looking back was not what the next part of this required. Fort Kelton announced itself through distance, first a smear of low buildings against the horizon, then through infrastructure, chain-link perimeter, and concrete barriers, and an entrance checkpoint staffed by MPs who had processed enough vehicle entries to do it without thinking. The desert around the installation was Sonoran in character. Saguaro cactus standing against the sky that was aggressively blue, in the way Arizona sky is blue in late morning, as if the color had been applied with an intensity that overcompensated for the surrounding landscape's muted palette. The air carried creosote and heated pavement. Victoria pulled up to the checkpoint in a rental sedan, civilian clothes, no rank insignia, a contractor access record waiting in the admin system 37 seconds from being confirmed. The MP at the gate was young, 22, maybe 23. He processed her ID and orders with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Training facilities are in the north sector, he said. Admin will get you sorted. He handed her the temporary access badge without making a transaction of it. She clipped it to her jacket and drove through. The base opened ahead of her like every other base she had ever been on. On motor pool on the left, barracks rose to the right, a mess hall straight ahead with soldiers in PD gear running the perimeter road. Normal, the particular rhythm of a military installation operating at its ordinary frequency. The east wing of the training complex was what she was here for. But not yet. Not today. She sorted her billeting without incident. She stowed her gear. She ate in the mess hall without speaking to anyone unnecessary. She was practiced at this part of undercover work, the part that required simply occupying space without leaving impressions. That evening, she lay on her bunk and listened to the base settle into its nighttime sounds. She took the device from the fireproof travel case she had brought inside her main bag and held it in both hands in the dark. She did not activate it. She just held it the way she sometimes held things that had belonged to her father, not for comfort exactly, but for the quality of continuity that objects carry when they have passed through enough hands in enough significant circumstances. She held it until her hands warmed it to body temperature. Then she set it on the shelf beside her bunk and closed her eyes. The main training bay the next morning. Victoria stood in the doorway and watched a man who moved like someone for whom movement had long since stopped being technique and become simply how his body occupied space. He was in his late 60s, white hair still cut high and tight, a tan built from decades of outdoor work in places that did not permit distraction. He moved through a disarmament demonstration with an economy that distinguished people who had actually used these techniques from people who had only taught them. His training partner was a soldier who outweighed him by 60 pounds. The soldier hit the mat hard and bounced up grinning. The older man said, "Again, slower through the weight transfer." Victoria had last seen Marcus Cole 4 years ago. She had not known he was at Fort Kelton. Cross's briefing had not mentioned it. Looking at him now, it made sense in the same way that the briefing's silence about it also made sense. Cole operated at the edge of official awareness by preference and long habit. He had been her bud/S instructor for Class 312. He was the man who had signed off on her passage through Hell Week when 2 other instructors were arguing for her removal. He had told her afterward in the quiet of someone who did not spend words unless they were earning their place. "You know how to suffer and keep thinking. That's rare. Don't waste it." She had not wasted it. Cole called the drill. The soldiers went to break. His eyes found her in the doorway without visible surprise, which was itself a form of information. He walked over, looked at her the way he used to look at trainees during surf evolution. Not at what they were doing, but at what they were managing underneath what they were doing. "Harmon," he said, not a question. She looked at him directly. There was more gray at his temples than 4 years ago. The lines around his eyes had deepened. Everything else was the same. "Didn't know you were here," she said. "I'm not official. Contractor. Training exchange," he paused. "What brings you to Fort Kelton?" She glanced at the soldiers on break, calculating distance and ambient noise. "Then Lily," she said. Something shifted behind his eyes. Hard, certain. The expression of a man who had been waiting for a specific word and had finally heard it spoken. "I knew her," he said. "She came through on TDY. Spring 2021. I knew her because of Gerald." Victoria went still. "She never said anything to you," Cole continued, "about Shadow Cell, about what happened inside it." "No, they won't," he said. "The ones who talk don't last here. The ones who last here learn not to talk." He turned. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." They did not go to Shadow Cell. That would have been visible, noted, logged in someone's mind, if not in any system. Instead, Cole led her through the training complex at the unhurried pace of a senior contractor, giving a junior colleague an orientation tour past the armory and the equipment room and the PT track baking in the morning sun until they reached the female barracks empty during training hours. The bathroom at the far end. Last stall. Cole pushed open the door and pointed. The walls were institutional green, layered with the graffiti that accumulates in private spaces over years, initials, dates, fragments of thought. Near the base of the wall, small enough to miss if you were not looking, deliberate enough to be unmistakable, if you were LH, prayed here. April 2021. Victoria crouched and looked at the letters. They had been made with something sharp and pressed deep. The paint had cured around them. They had been here for 3 years in this stall, in this room, in this building where the distance from the main compound was precisely far enough. She put her finger on the L and traced it. "There's more," Cole said. He took her to the equipment storage room, old metal filing cabinets, undigitized, unloved by the administrative processes that had moved everything else into database systems. He knew which drawer, which folder. Camera maintenance logs, he said, spreading pages on a workbench. Every Thursday, 1900 hours. Shadow Cell's recording system gets calibrated, timestamp adjusted. The work orders are signed by Rains. The technician is a specialist named Owen Bassett. Same man, same time, every week, for 3 years. Victoria looked at the pages. Same signature, same time notation. Every Thursday, like scheduled maintenance, like routine, like something that had been happening so long that everyone around it had stopped seeing it as anything other than infrastructure. Who else knows, she said. Nobody who will say so, Cole said. You learn quick here. There's what you see and what you report, and those two things don't overlap much. He closed the folder. Looked at her directly. You're not here for training exchange. No, NCIS, yes, he nodded once. The nod of a man who had been moving toward a decision for a long time and had finally arrived at it. I've been watching this for 2 years, he said, since I found her initials in that stall. Since I saw the pattern in the medical discharge rotations. I've been building what I could build alone, which isn't enough. Not for a court-martial, not for evidence that survives a defense attorney. He looked at the maintenance logs. So I did what I could. I left information for NCIS, specific enough to point them toward Fort Kelton. Specific enough that they would send someone with the right training and the right clearance, and a reason that went deeper than the job. She absorbed this. The economy of what he had done, not reporting formally, which would have triggered internal processes that Shadow Cell had demonstrated the ability to suppress, but creating a thread that would lead to someone capable of following it without being absorbed by the same institutional machinery. You were waiting, she said. Not for you specifically, he said. For someone like you, he paused. But you're better, because of Gerald. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a small glass capsule clear the size of a tooth filling. UV marker compound, he said. Chemical adhesive. You crush it with tongue pressure against your rear molar. Invisible to the naked eye. Under a black light, it adheres to skin fabric surfaces. Lasts 72 hours. Crime scene technicians will find it after. Links physical presence to location with a specificity that testimony alone cannot achieve. She understood what it was for. Evidence preservation. Scene documentation. I have the recorder, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Gerald's, she nodded. Something moved across his face, not quite grief, not quite satisfaction. The expression of someone encountering an object they placed into the world long ago and finding it had traveled to exactly the right place. Then you have what you need, he said. The operational briefing on Shadow Cell's structure took an hour. Rains, the principal. Anton Voss, enforcement. Kyle Mercer, Signal Corps, who managed the recording equipment and the digital distribution. Claire Sutton, Army MP, who made the entire apparatus feel professional and safe. Cole knew their patterns. He had been watching for 2 years. He knew what Thursday nights looked like, who came and went, what the maintenance logs concealed. Victoria listened without interrupting. She was practiced at receiving operational information without the urgency to respond overwhelming the information itself. When he finished, she said, I need to be in the room when they make their approach. Not as an observer, as a target. Cole's jaw tightened. I know what I'm doing, she said. I know you do. He looked at her for a long moment. 30 minutes from entry. Then I'm coming through that door regardless. I need confession time. On tape. Clear enough that there is no alternative interpretation. No claims of consensual training protocol. I need them to say enough that the recording makes the case without requiring anything else. He worked through the operational arithmetic of it, the failure modes, the probability distributions. He did not like any of the numbers. He understood that this did not matter. 30 minutes, he said. And if I hear anything through the monitoring relay that sounds like immediate physical danger, I'm moving before the clock runs out. Agreed. They shook hands. The handshake converted something not the friendship they already had, but the specific and consequential partnership that the next 72 hours required. Let me introduce you to the people you're going to put in prison, Cole said. The main training bay mid-morning. Shadow Cell occupied the east wing down a corridor with the specific quality of acoustic isolation that could be explained as design optimization and also served purposes that had nothing to do with acoustics. The door was steel. The placard read, Advanced Interrogation Resistance Training. Cole knocked once and entered without waiting. 30 by 30, padded mat floor. Equipment along 3 walls. Stress position apparatus, sensory deprivation tools, the gear found in legitimate SERE training facilities, when the goal was teaching resistance to coercive interrogation. A room that looked to someone not looking carefully exactly like what it claimed to be. 4 people inside. Derek Raines stood in the center demonstrating a joint lock to 2 soldiers. His voice was easy and his movements precise. He was explaining the psychology of compliance when the body concluded that resistance was more costly than cooperation, what that calculation felt like from the inside. He spoke about it with the fluency of someone who had studied it from both directions and found the second direction more useful. He was Victoria thought exactly what his performance reviews described, the specific product that institutions generated when they confused charisma for character long enough that the confusion became policy. Anton Voss stood near the door, 6'4", 240 pounds. He held the room's perimeter with the stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was more effective than visible alertness. He said nothing. His eyes tracked Victoria from the moment she entered. Kyle Mercer sat on a bench with a tablet, fingers moving across it without pause. A phone was mounted on a small tripod to his left lens, aimed at the center of the room. Claire Sutton stood near the east wall. She saw Victoria and Cole enter, and her face produced a smile, warm, immediate, the kind of smile that functioned as invitation rather than greeting. She had been conventionally pretty in her early 20s in a way that military life had worn at the edges without eliminating. The warmth was genuine. That was the troubling thing about Claire Sutton. Victoria understood immediately she was not simply performing warmth. The warmth was real. What sat behind it was something she had made peace with over time, and the peace was the troubling part. Raines looked up, assessed Victoria with the practiced speed of someone who had made his living reading people and found the assessment effortless. Then the smile arrived a fraction of a second after the assessment, which was the only tell. He crossed the room and extended his hand. His grip was firm and lasted slightly past the point where firmness was information. "Staff Sergeant Derek Raines," he said, "welcome to Fort Kelton." He walked her through the program's structure with the practiced fluency of someone who had given this explanation many times and had refined it to exactly the level of detail that created interest without creating skepticism. Week 1, basic resistance concepts. Week 2, advanced psychological pressure methodology. Week 3, full scenario integration. "Everything here is designed to identify your threshold," he said. "We've trained over 200 personnel, 0 washouts. Impressive retention," Victoria said. "We've got methods." He gestured toward the others. Voss handled physical resistance training. Mercer handled technical documentation filming, everything for performance analysis, he said, because visual feedback was essential for understanding where subjects held and where they didn't. Sutton was the program's welfare coordinator, making sure everyone knows it's a safe professional environment, Sutton said. Her voice had the quality of someone who had said this sentence many times and still believed it, or had learned to believe it. "Just tough love and hard lessons. You should join a session," Raines said. "We run evening blocks, smaller groups, more individual attention. Really lets us get at what each person specifically needs to work on. I'll check my schedule," Victoria said. "Do that." He held her eyes a beat past comfort. "Always room for one more. A female SEAL. That's exceptional. Must have required constant proving." "I'm used to it," Victoria said. He smiled. Then he turned back to his demonstration. The soldiers repositioned. Mercer's camera indicator stayed green. Cole touched Victoria's elbow and they left. The corridor. Then outside. The desert air, which tasted clean after the recycled air of the training wing, even if the heat of it was immediate and total. "Sutton is the critical element," Victoria said. "Yes. Without her, the recruitment mechanism fails. She makes it feel safe. She is the reason young soldiers walk through that door believing it is professional development." They walked in silence across the training compound's central courtyard. "Thursday," Victoria said. Cole looked at her. "I'll be ready," she said. He understood what he was standing next to. He did not argue. He separated from her at the edge of the courtyard, and she walked toward the main training bay, where she had a morning of CQB drills to deliver with exactly the level of competence that would make her worth targeting. At 16:40 hours during the water break after the final drilling rotation, Claire Sutton appeared at her shoulder with the unhurried ease of someone who had calculated the approach in advance. "You're really good," Sutton said. "Most instructors at your rank have been off the mat too long. You still move like it's real." "Muscle memory," Victoria said. Sutton glanced around. "There's a session Thursday evening, 1900, small group, the kind of focused attention you can't get in these larger rotations." She lowered her voice. "I went through it when I first got here. Changed how I think about stress management, about knowing your limits and moving past them. Someone with your background would get so much out of it." Victoria let the silence sit for a moment. Thursday works, she said. Sutton's smile widened slightly. Wear PT gear. It can get physical. She walked back toward the group, back into the warm and ordinary rhythm of a base afternoon, and Victoria watched her go and thought about what it cost to maintain that warmth across 4 years of knowing what the room behind the steel door actually was. She had 2 days. She used them the way her father had taught her to use time before a mission, not to rehearse what could go wrong, but to ensure that every preparation was complete, so that when the door opened, she walked through it carrying only what was necessary. On Wednesday night, she could not sleep. She lay on her bunk in the dark and held the device in both hands and thought about Berlin, 1988, and about a 23-year-old her father's age learning from a senior chief what it meant to build evidence in a place designed to prevent it. She thought about Lily at Camp Lejeune, threading turquoise beads onto leather cord. She thought about the 14th stone in the 7th row of Section 60. She pressed the switch on the device. 3 seconds. The red LED blinked once and held. She let it record 10 seconds of the barracks at night, someone's distant music, the building cooling in the desert temperature, dropped the ordinary texture of an ordinary place. Then she stopped it. Not yet, she said to the dark. Thursday, she said. She set the device on the shelf and lay back and did not sleep. But that was all right. She had never needed sleep the night before. She had only ever needed the morning. Part 2, the long game, Wednesday night, moved slowly. Victoria sat on the edge of her bunk and did not try to force the sleep that was not coming. The body had its own preparation process, and that process did not always include rest. What it included was a particular quality of stillness. Not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of someone who has already made every decision and is simply allowing time to pass until the decisions become actions. She had spent the afternoon reviewing what she knew. 47 anonymous reports, 3 confirmed complaints removed from administrative processing, 53 victims across 36 months, a number that was Rains' own accounting, delivered in his own voice in a conversation Cole had partially recorded during 2 years of observation. Cole's recordings were inadmissible. They were not clean chain of custody. They could not anchor a prosecution. What they could do was tell her exactly what she was walking into. She held the device in both hands. She had carried it for 5 years without using it. She had known somewhere beneath the operational surface of her daily work that there would come a moment when the mission could not be done any other way. She had not known the moment would look like this. A room she had never entered. A steel door behind which her sister had been a different person than the person who left. She pressed the switch. 3 seconds. The red LED blinked once and held. She let it record 8 seconds of the barracks at night. Then she stopped it. Use it only when the mission cannot be done any other way, and only when innocent lives depend on it. There were 47 reports. There were 3 missing complaints. There were Lily's initials carved into the paint of a bathroom stall in a place Lily had never mentioned to her. She set the device on the shelf and lay back and thought about what the promise actually required, not about whether to go in. That decision had been made in the NCIS office in San Diego the moment Cross slid the photograph of the bracelet across the table, but about what going in correctly looked like. There was a version where she only recorded. There was a version where she walked in, captured audio, and walked out when it became physical. Rains would immediately move to delete the digital archive. Warrants would arrive too late. The archive that had taken 3 years to build would be gone before the ink on the warrants was dry. She needed them on record. She needed to ensure the digital evidence survived. And she needed to come home. There was no version of that in which she was only a recorder. She closed her eyes. She thought about her father sitting at the kitchen table the last night before his flight, placing the device between them, shaking his head when she tried to return it. He had understood the difference between a promise made to preserve life and a promise made to avoid difficulty. He had understood it in Berlin at 23 and carried it through 24 years of service. He had passed it on. She would honor both promises. She would come home, and she would do what the mission required to get there. The morning before Thursday moved with the particular slowness of days that contain specific deadlines. Victoria ran the PT track at 05:30 alone in the early desert light. She ran 8 miles at a pace that was not comfortable and was not meant to be. Discomfort in preparation was insurance. The body that had been recently reminded of what it could manage was the body that did not make decisions based on pain during the moment when decisions mattered. She attended the morning CQB rotation and taught with the unhurried precision of someone for whom these techniques had long since passed from being learned to being structural, not something she did but something she was. Colonel James Hargrove was present at 0900. He stood at the edge of the bay with a coffee he was not drinking and the expression of a man cataloging what he observed without committing to a conclusion. He had been a JAG officer for 20 years. In that time, he had prosecuted cases other attorneys called unprosecutable and had lost cases other attorneys called certain. He understood that the gap between what was true and what was provable was where most of the significant work happened. He had watched Victoria Harmon for 3 days. He had expected someone ambitious and technically capable moving through Fort Kelton on an assignment that would produce a line on a performance evaluation. He had expected the competence that came from being told repeatedly that one was competent. What he had seen was different. He had seen her correct an administrative database error that 2 clerks and a duty officer had missed without drawing attention to the correction. He had seen her at 0200 in the record storage room, not looking for something already identified, but doing the slower work of building a map from incomplete materials. He had seen her with Cole, and he had understood from the quality of information that passed between them that their shared frame of reference ran deeper than the present assignment. He had not seen what he expected to see, which was someone who would make the mistake that would compromise whatever case was being built. He finished his coffee without drinking it and left. At 1600 hours, Victoria returned to her quarters and worked methodically through the preparation. The device first. She had already identified the optimal placement, right forearm microphone facing up, seated inside the sleeve seam, where it would register as reinforcement fabric to anyone conducting a pat-down who was not specifically searching for it. She used thread and a curved needle from the small kit in her travel bag, 4 passes on each side, tight enough to hold through movement. The LED, when activated, would be invisible from outside the sleeve. She put on the PT shirt and held her arm at different angles. Nothing visible. Nothing that read as anything except the sleeve of a regulation shirt. The U-boob capsule next. She applied the dental adhesive Cole had provided and seated the capsule against the rear surface of her upper left molar. The glass held. She pressed her tongue against it. Present but manageable. Not something she would forget was there. The beacon watch. Left wrist. She pressed and held the crown for 3 seconds, confirmed the silent alert function released. Last, the KA bar. Cole had brought it to her door that morning, before first light. Wrapped in a cloth, no explanation offered beyond the one that was already understood. The knife had belonged to his father before it belonged to him, and to his father's father before that, and had been carried through 3 American wars before it came to rest in peacetime in a drawer in an Arlington apartment. He had said, "I want it in the room with you." She had not argued. She secured the sheath to her right ankle and laced her boot over it. She changed into PT gear. Black shorts, gray shirt with the device sewn into the right sleeve. She tied her hair back and looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink for exactly as long as was necessary. Then she went to find Cole. They met in the corridor outside the equipment room at 17:30. 30 minutes from entry, Cole said. "I'll be in the security monitoring office. The feed from the hallway camera runs through there. If your beacon signals, I'm moving immediately. If I don't receive a signal by the 29-minute mark, I'm moving regardless." He held out a small earpiece the size and color of a hearing aid. "One-way audio relay," he said. "Passive receiver. I can hear the room through a secondary pickup on the hallway camera's audio system. You won't hear me, but I'll know what's happening." She took it and seated it. "Marcus," she said. He looked at her. "Gerald trusted you." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "He did. So do I." That landed somewhere in him. She could see it, the small adjustment in the lines around his eyes. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder. 1 second. Then he stepped back. "Get them talking," he said. "Keep them talking. The more they explain, the less there is to argue about later." She turned and walked toward the east wing. The corridor was empty at 1904. The fluorescent lights ran at a slightly different frequency than the lights in the rest of the training complex. Her footsteps were the only sound in the hallway. The steel door was at the end. She stopped outside it. She pressed the switch on the device for 3 seconds. The LED blinked once inside her sleeve and held steady. She put her hand on the door. She thought about section 67th row, 14th stone. She thought about what she had said there and what she had promised. Then she opened the door and walked in. The room was different from her first visit. The equipment had been repositioned. The mats arranged to concentrate available space toward the center. The overhead lights were dimmed to roughly 60%, sufficient for vision, insufficient for the quality of recording that required full illumination. A single metal chair occupied the center of the room. Kyle Mercer sat on the bench to the left, tablet, active phone on the tripod with the lens aimed at the chair. The camera indicator light was green. Anton Voss stood to the right of the door, positioned so that the door's swing path ended 12 inches from where he had placed himself. He said nothing. His hands were at his sides. Derek Raines stood near the chair. He had refined something about how he carried himself. The easy confidence of the training bay was still present, but stripped of its social function. Reduced to its operational core, the confidence of a man who had done this 47 times and found no reason to revise his expectations. Claire Sutton was behind Victoria. The door closed. Commander Harmon Raines said. His voice was the training bay voice, measured and approachable, but applied now to a different temperature of room. Thanks for joining us. This session is going to be intensive. What are we doing? Victoria said. She put uncertainty into it, not much. Enough. Stress inoculation, Raines said. Understanding how you respond under genuine psychological pressure. We're going to push your thresholds. See where you hold and where you don't. He gestured toward the chair. Sit down. We'll start with the baseline. She moved to the chair and sat. The metal was cold through the thin fabric of her shorts. She set her hands on her thighs and looked at Raines. He walked a slow half circle around her. Not threatening yet, establishing geometry. You went through SERE, he said. Yes. Then you know what it feels like to have someone try to break you. But SERE has a ceiling. Everyone in the room knows the exercise has rules. The ceiling is what keeps it from being real. He stopped in front of her. His eyes were doing the thing they did in photographs, reading as warm at the surface, something else underneath. Real resistance, he continued, isn't about tolerating temporary discomfort. It's about understanding what someone has that you can't afford to lose. That's where the actual leverage lives. Mercer turned the tablet to face her. The screen showed a grid of photographs. Victoria in the shower facility. Victoria in her quarters changing. Victoria on her bunk in the early morning, the posture of someone not sleeping. 4 days of documentation. Every private moment she had believed was private. We monitor personnel in the advanced program, Raines said. Security purposes, making sure we understand who we're working with. He nodded to Mercer. Mercer's fingers moved. The grid collapsed. A folder opened. The folder was labeled with 2 initials and a last name. L. Harmon. Inside it, photographs of Lily at Fort Kelton, spring 2021. Lily in the training complex. Lily walking the road between barracks and mess hall. Lily small and precise in her Marine Corps utility uniform, looking at something off camera, with the expression Victoria remembered seeing across dinner tables and in the rearview mirror of their mother's car, open, attentive, trusting the frame of the world she had been given. 14 video file thumbnails below the photographs. Raines touched one. 5 seconds of footage played on the screen. Victoria did not move. What she saw in those 5 seconds she would carry for the rest of her life. Her sister in a room like this one, reading words from a card held at the edge of the frame. Raines's voice off camera, offering direction with the measured cadence of someone managing a production. Lily's face working to hold itself together and not succeeding at the rate required. 5 seconds. Raines stopped it. We kept everything, Raines said. Archive purposes. Quality control. Your sister was particularly memorable. 14 complete files. He crouched to eye level. His voice remained conversational. Here is how this works, he said. Tonight you participate in the session. You read what we ask you to read, clearly and completely. The footage of your sister stays in the archive where no one outside this room will ever access it. Your footage, which we've already begun compiling, stays there with it. You return to your assignment. We continue our work. No contact from us again unless circumstances require it. And if I don't cooperate, Victoria said. The recordings go to distribution, he said. We maintain relationships with 23 acquisition contacts, domestic and international. The international ones are particularly interested in American military personnel. Compromat, the Russians call it. It has a long history of effective application. Your career, your family, your sister's memory, all of it attached to footage that would define how every person who knew you understood both of you for the rest of your lives. Voss spoke for the first time. The accent was Eastern European, precise and unornamented. It is a simple calculation, he said. Cooperation has a fixed cost. Resistance has an open-ended one. Claire Sutton came forward. Her voice was the voice from the water break, soft and steady. It's not what you think it is, she said. A few minutes, you read some lines, then it's done. Most people find it is not as significant as they anticipated once it's over. Victoria looked at her directly, not at Raines, at Sutton. How long have they had yours, she said. Sutton went still. Rains started to speak. Victoria held eye contact with Sutton. 2 seconds. That was all. 2 seconds in which Sutton did not answer and did not redirect, in which the warmth in her face underwent a process not disappearing, but becoming translucent, the surface underneath briefly visible. Rains talked over it. What matters, he said, is the decision in front of you. Victoria looked back at him. Before I read anything, she said, I need to understand what I'm agreeing to. I need to know the actual scope, how many participants, what the distribution model looks like. I need to understand what this actually is. Rains assessed her. She watched him conclude what she wanted him to conclude, that she was negotiating, moving through the stages of compliance in the predictable sequence that 47 previous participants had moved through. The question was due diligence, not delay. He straightened. 53 confirmed participants over 36 months, he said. 100% operational security, no successful prosecutions, no records. Our methods have been refined over 3 years to ensure complete containment. Everyone who goes through Shadow Cell understands the situation. And the distribution, she said. Mercer looked up from his tablet. He had the social awareness of someone who spent more time with systems than with people. 23 acquisition contacts, he said. Secure Bitcoin architecture. Average transaction value approximately 10,000 per file. The financial model funds the technical infrastructure and compensates the team. Rains shot him a look. Mercer returned to his tablet without apparent awareness that he had said something his superior preferred unsaid. It was already on tape, all of it. 53 victims, 3 years, 23 contacts, 10,000 per file. The financial model. Every word inside the device in her sleeve running at the correct speed, capturing the magnetic alignment of particles into the shape of a federal prosecution. She needed one more thing. She looked at Rains. My sister, she said. In the footage. Did she fight it at first? Rains's expression shifted not to discomfort, but to something almost opposite. The expression of a man who had been asked a question he found flattering. At first, he said, they all do initially. Then they reach the same calculation everyone reaches. Your sister was intelligent. She understood the situation. He paused. Then she didn't handle the aftermath as well as we hoped. Some people's threshold is lower than it appears on the surface. Victoria looked at him for one full second. Good, she said. He waited. Because I'm not her. She stood. She pressed the crown of the beacon watch as she rose, which Rains read as a nervous adjustment, which it was not. It was 30 minutes beginning. She moved before the word had finished reaching the air. Rains's hand came up, the instinctive gesture of a man who expected to control what happened next and had not yet processed that this expectation was already obsolete. She caught his wrist, applied the rotation that turned a raised arm into a liability, and he came forward off balance. His other hand rose toward her face in the reflexive compensation the technique was designed to produce. His fingers made contact with her mouth. 200 pounds per square inch. SEAL training included jaw strength development for specific operational reasons involving underwater equipment and emergency procedures under pressure. The training produced a measurable bite force. She applied it to the webbing between his index and middle finger, through the skin, through the underlying tissue, until enamel met resistance that was not tissue. The sound Rains made was not a word. She held for 2 full seconds, then released, and he went backward, and she was already turning. Voss was moving. He had processed the situation faster than Mercer, but slower than she needed him to. She went low under his reach, inside the radius, where size became a disadvantage, and drove her right elbow into his larynx with the targeting of a technique practiced 10,000 times on the mat and understood now in a way that the mat had approximated but never fully replicated. Voss's hands went to his throat. She drove her knee into his sternum as he folded, and he went against the door and down, and the sounds he produced were those of someone renegotiating their relationship with oxygen on an emergency basis. Mercer was on his feet. His hands moved across the tablet with the frantic speed of someone executing a deletion protocol. She covered the distance in 3 steps, took his wrist with her left hand, and applied pressure to the joint in the direction joints did not accommodate. The tablet hit the mat. The phone on its tripod was still recording. She caught the phone with her right hand as it fell. Airplane mode, 2 taps. The upload that had been initiating was severed at 63%. She locked the screen and held the phone. Mercer was on his knees, one wrist held against his chest. Sutton had not moved. She stood against the east wall in the position she had been in when Victoria stood up, and her face held the quality of someone watching something they had told themselves could not happen. Victoria stood in the center of the room and looked at each of them. She reached into her sleeve with her left hand and found the device by touch. She removed it and held it at chest height. The red LED was blinking. 14 minutes and 40 seconds of recording and analog tape, unhackable, containing everything necessary and more than enough besides. She set Mercer's phone on the bench and walked to Rains. She pulled him upright by his collar and positioned him facing Mercer's camera, which was still on its tripod indicator light, still green. "State your name and rank," she said. He said nothing. She reached to her ankle and removed the KA bar from Cole's sheath. She placed it in the mat 18 inches from Rains's right knee. "State your name and rank," she said again. His voice, when it came, was broken at the edges. "Staff Sergeant Derek Rains, United States Army." "What is Shadow Cell?" he breathed. Then he told her. The structure, the recruitment methodology, the filming, the archive, the distribution model, the financial records, the acquisition contacts. He told her about 3 foreign intelligence wallet addresses that NSA watch lists would later confirm. He told her about a Capitol Hill IP he had never been able to identify by name, but had confirmed through transaction. Metadata was a government network. He told her how many people had passed through the steel door and how many complaints had been submitted and what happened to each of them. Owen Bassett's name came from Rains's own mouth. That detail would be used 6 months later to establish the full scope of the conspiracy. When Rains stopped, she turned to Voss. He invoked his right to silence. His attorney later described it as the only intelligent decision he made during his entire involvement with Shadow Cell. She turned to Mercer. Kyle Mercer talked for 9 minutes. Server architecture, encryption keys, customer database, Bitcoin wallet addresses. The complete technical infrastructure of an operation running inside a United States Army installation for 3 years. She turned to Sutton. Sutton was crying, not loudly. The kind of crying that happens when something held for a very long time finally encounters a structure that cannot hold it anymore. "I was first," Sutton said. Her voice was steady, the way voices are sometimes steady when the person has moved past the point where steadiness requires effort. "Spring 2020. He kept my footage, said if I helped the program run, he'd keep it secured." She stopped. "He never intended to delete it." "I know that now. I've known it for 2 years. "How many?" Victoria said. 38 directly recruited, Sutton said. "Others I encouraged. Told them it was standard training. That it helped." She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. I have been sorry for 4 years and it has not amounted to anything useful." "It's going to," Victoria said. The door opened. Marcus Cole came through first. He had been in the security monitoring office for 27 minutes and 40 seconds, listening through the hallway camera's audio relay, and had held the 30-minute agreement with the precision of a man who had made many agreements under difficult conditions and understood that agreement was not the same as indifference. Behind him, base security. 3 MPs entering a space whose contents they had been partially briefed on but not fully. Cole assessed the room in 1 second. He looked at the 4 people on the floor and against the wall. He looked at Victoria in the center of the room, with the device in her left hand and Mercer's phone in her right. He looked at the KA bar in the mat. "You good," he said. "Evidence is secure," she said. He crossed the room and took the device from her left hand with both of his carefully, the way you handled something irreplaceable. He produced an evidence bag and sealed it. He signed the chain of custody form from his jacket pocket and handed her the pen. She signed. "Medics," he said to the senior MP. 4 subjects, 1 with hand trauma, 1 possible laryngeal injury, 2 capable of transport under their own power. The MP radioed it in. Victoria sat down on the bench. She set Mercer's phone on the mat beside her feet. She put her hands on her knees. The adrenaline was receding. The body had its own accounting process, and the accounting happened after the action. Her hands were steady. They would remain steady for another 40 minutes, then they would shake for approximately 3 minutes, then they would be steady again. She knew this from experience. She looked at the tripod. The indicator light was still green. The camera had recorded everything. She thought about the 47 reports and the 3 missing complaints and the 14 files in a folder with Lily's initials. She thought about the 14th stone in the 7th row. Cole finished coordinating with the MPs and came to sit beside her on the bench. "Diana Cross is 40 minutes out," he said. "She was already in Phoenix." Victoria nodded. He looked at the device in the evidence bag in his hand. "Gerald trained me to build evidence in rooms designed to prevent it," he said quietly. "Berlin, 1988. I thought at the time I was teaching him." He looked at the sealed bag. I understand now that he was paying attention in ways I didn't fully appreciate until much later. She looked at him. She said. Cole sat with that for a moment. Then they waited together for Diana Cross and the next part of what this had to become, while the MPs secured the room and the medics worked, and the desert outside ran out of sun and went dark the way deserts go dark completely all at once, as if someone had reached up and turned off a very large and very indifferent light. Part 3, What Gerald Left Behind. The forensics report arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after Shadow Cell. Diana Cross delivered it in a conference room at Fort Kelton that NCIS had commandeered for the duration of the investigation. 247 pages, the language technical and precise, translating in every paragraph into something simpler. In its plainest terms, the report was comprehensive devastation. Kyle Mercer's phone contained 289 gigabytes across 847 individual files, 53 victim folders. Each folder averaged 14 video files. Metadata was intact. GPS coordinates confirmed Fort Kelton's East Training Wing across every file in the archive. Device IDs traced to 3 phones Mercer had owned over 4 years. Timestamps showed consistent Thursday evening activity dating to late 2020. The editing software cache completed the picture. Files had been packaged for external distribution, compressed, and renamed with alphanumeric codes rather than names and formats optimized for secure transmission to contacts who preferred their acquisitions arrive without identifying information attached. The customer database was more specific than anything Mercer had disclosed during his 9 minutes of talking in the room. 23 unique Bitcoin wallet addresses. Transaction history confirmed $847,000 transferred across 36 months. Blockchain forensics traced 12 domestic addresses to accounts that FBI Financial Crimes was already mapping. 11 international addresses required NSA signals intelligence coordination. 3 of those 11 had already been flagged on existing watch lists. Cross set those 3 files on the table. Base Commander Colonel Patricia Vance was present, looking like someone who had aged considerably in less than a week. Colonel James Hargrove sat to her right, JAG insignia legal pad in front of him with handwriting that was small and dense. Marcus Cole was present as civilian witness and operational handler. Victoria sat across from all of them. The 3 flagged addresses Cross said correspond to wallet clusters previously identified as associated with foreign intelligence acquisition networks. The first traces to a GRU-affiliated operation active since 2019. The second to a Chinese Ministry of State Security Technical Collection Unit. The third to an Iranian signals intelligence contractor. She let that settle for a moment. Shadow Cell had not been a sexual assault operation with a financial component. It had been a sexual assault operation simultaneously functioning as an intelligence collection and leverage infrastructure with 3 separate foreign services as paying customers, and an unknown number of American military personnel whose footage was now in the possession of those services. What they had done to Lily and 52 others was also an act of espionage. It had been running inside a United States Army installation for 3 years without a single successful prosecution. Hargrove wrote something on his legal pad and did not look up. There is a 4th address, Cross said. She placed a single sheet on the table. Domestic, Capitol Hill AP Range Government Network. 14 files purchased between 2022 and 2024. Total transactions, $140,000. The address traces to a government subnet which required a secondary warrant to pierce. Cross's voice was level. We identified the account holder yesterday morning, a senior staff advisor to a sitting member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The room was quiet for a long moment. FBI counterintelligence took custody of the case file this morning. Cross continued. The advisor has been placed on administrative leave. The senator's office has been notified through appropriate channels and is cooperating. The senator himself is not currently a subject. Hargrove set down his pen. Shadow Cell was not a local operation, he said. No, Cross said. It was not. Victoria looked at the single sheet on the table. 14 files, a Capitol Hill address, money moving through a government network to a man who sat in rooms where decisions about military personnel were made, who read briefings about operational security, who had access to the kind of information foreign intelligence services paid to obtain and maintain. She thought about 3 complaints that had moved through administrative channels and stopped moving. She thought about whether they had stopped only because of Owen Bassett and $5,000, or whether there had been other reasons at other levels that no one had yet finished tracing. She thought about Lily filing a report 2 days before she died. She thought about 18 hours. The secondary forensics finding came 3 days later. Cross presented it to Victoria privately in the temporary NCIS office in Fort Kelton's administrative building. Lily's complaint file, Cross said, did not move through administrative processing and failed to reach the appropriate desk. Digital forensics recovered deletion logs from the administrative system's backup architecture. The logs showed the file was accessed 18 hours after Lily submitted it by a user account that had been deleted from the active system, but whose activity record survived in the backup structure. Cross placed the forensic reconstruction on the desk. The account was assigned to a duty administrative officer at Fort Kelton, not a member of Shadow Cell, no prior connection to Rains. Bank records obtained under warrant show a $5,000 cash deposit the week following the deletion. Victoria looked at the document. Lily had done everything correctly. She had processed what happened to her with enough clarity and enough courage to put it in writing and submit it through the proper channel. She had done exactly what the system said to do, and the system had received it, assigned it a timestamp, and then someone had accepted $5,000 to ensure it stopped being something the system had received. Lily had not failed. She had not been failed by process or ordinary institutional inattention. She had been failed by a deliberate act purchased for $5,000, executed 18 hours after she asked for help. Victoria sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and signed the documentation that would add the duty administrative officer to the list of federal charges stemming from Fort Kelton. She did not say anything else. There was nothing useful to say. The court-martial of Staff Sergeant Derek Rains convened at Fort Bragg, North Carolina on a Tuesday morning in late October. The Army had chosen the venue deliberately. Fort Bragg was neutral ground away from Fort Kelton's local dynamics, away from the institutional memory that had allowed Shadow Cell to operate for 3 years without successful prosecution. The courtroom was not large. The gallery seated 40. It was full. 14 of the 53 survivors had chosen to attend in person. Victim advocates sat beside them. Media had been granted limited pool coverage. Observers from JAG from NCIS headquarters and from 2 congressional oversight staff positions were present in the gallery. Colonel James Hargrove was not prosecuting the case. He was present as a senior JAG observer, a formal designation that carried no specific procedural role and that he had requested through official channels 3 weeks prior. He sat in the second row of the gallery with a legal pad on his knee and watched. The lead prosecutor was Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield, 11 years in military justice with a reputation for preparing cases with a thoroughness that defense attorneys found difficult to navigate around. Whitfield had spent 4 weeks with the evidence. She understood it the way prosecutors needed to understand evidence, not just what it showed, but why every element of what it showed was immune to the alternative interpretations that defense counsel would construct. Victoria took the stand on the first morning. She was in dress blues. The ribbons on her left breast included the Navy Cross, the Combat Action Ribbon, the NCIS Meritorious Service Decoration. The uniform told a story before she opened her mouth, which was part of why Whitfield had her testifying first. She walked through the operation with the methodical precision she had been trained to apply to testimony. The NCIS briefing, the identification of the bracelet in the evidence photograph, the undercover insertion, contact with Marcus Cole and the discovery of the maintenance logs, Claire Sutton's recruitment approach, the preparation, the entry into Shadow Cell on the evening of October 14th. Whitfield played the audio recording, 14 minutes of tape transferred from the analog device to digital format by NCIS Forensics under chain of custody protocols that Whitfield had already spent an hour establishing for the jury. 8 officers, 4 enlisted, all branches, all senior enough to understand what organized military misconduct looked like and what it cost. The courtroom listened to Rains explain the leverage system in his own voice, to Mercer's voluntary addition of the per-file transaction value, to Voss's confirmation of the enforcement methodology, to Sutton's fractured apology and the admission underneath it. And then because the evidentiary record required it because the jury needed to understand what the footage was and what it had been used for, Whitfield played 5 seconds of one of the files from Mercer's archive. Lily's voice. Victoria sat in the witness stand and listened to 5 seconds of her sister's voice in a room full of strangers and did not move and did not look away from the fixed point on the far wall she had selected before the playback began. 5 seconds. Whitfield stopped it. The jury was still. Victoria sat with the 5 seconds inside her in the place where it would remain and understood that this was the permanent cost of the recording, not the operation itself, not the things she had done in that room, but this sitting in a military courtroom while strangers heard her sister's voice, and there was no version of justice that did not require exactly that. The cost was real, and it was not reversible. and she had accepted it because accepting it was what the promise required. She completed her testimony. Raines's defense attorney was a civilian named Calloway, retained by Raines's family at significant expense, skilled in the discipline of creating uncertainty where there should be none. He cross-examined with the focus of someone who understood he was not winning, but was obligated to construct appeal issues. He asked about her training, about her use of force, about whether she had provoked the assault she then used as justification for disabling 4 United States soldiers. She answered each question with the same quality of attention. "You bit through this man's hand," Calloway said. "You crushed another man's larynx. You claim this was self-defense." "I claim it because it was," Victoria said. The recording documents the sequence of events precisely. Staff Sergeant Raines placed his hand against my mouth without consent during an attempted sexual assault. My response was proportional to the threat and legally consistent with the right to resist. The subsequent actions were necessary to prevent the destruction of evidence during an active federal investigation. The recording documents that sequence as well. Calloway paused. That answer was not in the version of the examination he had prepared. He sat down. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was returned on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all 53 counts of sexual assault, guilty on conspiracy, guilty on production and distribution of obscene material, guilty on the espionage-related charges stemming from sales to foreign intelligence contacts. The judge read the sentence into the record while Raines sat without moving. 45 years. United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth. Dishonorable discharge. Reduction to the lowest enlisted grade. Forfeiture of all pay and benefits. He would be 73 years old at the completion of that sentence in a military prison populated by people who understood precisely what the charges described. Anton Voss received life without the possibility of parole at ADX Florence in Colorado, the federal supermax facility where incarceration meant 23 hours of solitude per day in a concrete cell, the remaining hour in a space slightly larger than that. He would die there. The timeline was the only variable. Kyle Mercer received 30 years under his cooperation agreement. He was 25 years old. He would be 55 at release if the agreement held, and his conduct warranted the reduction it implied. Claire Sutton received 12 years. Her attorney had negotiated carefully, and the prosecution had agreed because Sutton's testimony had been essential, and because what Sutton was remained more complicated than what the other 3 were. She would serve 8 years with good behavior. She would leave at 40, carrying a federal conviction and the particular weight of someone who had been both the thing that is done to and the thing that does it, and who would spend years trying to account honestly for both. Owen Bassett received 5 years for conspiracy and obstruction. He maintained that he had not known what happened behind Shadow Cell's steel door. The prosecution was not required to prove that he had. Conspiracy required only that he knew the money was payment for the act, and the timing of the deposit made that demonstrable. The duty administrative officer who had deleted Lily's complaint file received 8 years for obstruction of justice and destruction of federal evidence. He told his attorney he had not known what the file contained. His attorney did not find this argument as useful as he had hoped. 3 days after the verdict, a padded envelope arrived at Victoria's temporary quarters at Fort Kelton. No return address. Inside, wrapped in the same cloth Cole had used the morning before the operation, the KA bar cleaned the sheath intact, a single index card tucked inside the wrap. 2 words in Cole's handwriting, "Keep it." She did. The meeting with the survivors took place in Fort Kelton's Chapel Annex on a Saturday morning in November, 3 weeks after the verdicts. 41 of the 53 had indicated willingness to attend. The other 12 were deployed or abroad, or not yet at the place where a room full of people sharing the same wound was something they could face. There was no pressure, and there would never be pressure. The evidence stood without their testimony, and the conviction stood without their presence. But 41 came. They ranged in age from 19 to 27. Every branch, every rank from private to staff sergeant. They sat in the chapel annex's folding chairs in the arrangement of people who shared a significant thing and did not yet know what to do with the fact of sharing it, some with arms crossed, some with hands in their laps, some looking at the floor, some looking directly at the front of the room, with the expression of people who had decided that if they were going to be here, they were going to be fully present. Victoria stood at the front without a podium. She did not deliver a speech. She told them what had happened in the order it happened, without embellishment and without reduction. She told them about Lily. She told them about the bracelet in the evidence photograph and what it had cost her to sit in that briefing room and recognize it. She told them about the 7-month gap between when Lily filed her complaint and when Cross pulled the deletion logs from the backup architecture. She told them Lily did everything correctly. She filed the report. The system received it. Someone was paid to ensure the system then forgot it. That is not a failure of the person who filed the report. That is a crime committed against the person who filed the report, and that crime has now been prosecuted. The room was quiet. A hand went up near the back. Private First Class, 20 years old, the youngest person present. What happens to the footage, she asked. The files they made. NCIS has the original archive under federal evidence seal. Victoria said, it will not be released publicly. The copies sold to foreign acquisition contacts are being pursued through FBI and international law enforcement cooperation. That process is slow. It is not guaranteed to recover every copy, but every file that is recovered will be destroyed under federal court order, and anyone who attempts to use remaining files against any of you is committing additional federal felonies, distribution of evidence under seal, witness intimidation. The law protects you now in ways it did not when you were first in that room. Another hand, a staff sergeant, Army, early 20s. She had arrived with the expression of someone who had decided before entering that she was not going to be moved by whatever happened here and was currently revising that decision. You got what you needed, the staff sergeant said. You'll get a commendation and move on. We're the ones who live with this. Yes, Victoria said. She did not explain the 5 seconds of Lily's voice in the courtroom because that was not the point. The woman in front of her did not need Victoria's accounting of personal cost. She needed something specific. I am not done, Victoria said. This is not the end of my involvement in what happened here. I am building a unit. NCIS, Military Sexual Trauma Investigations. Dedicated personnel. The mandate is to identify operations like Shadow Cell, build prosecutable cases, and execute them. I have authorization for 12 personnel. 3 of those positions I am offering today in this room to anyone who wants to be part of stopping this from happening to anyone else. The room shifted, not dramatically. Nothing dramatic happened, but something moved in it, the thing that moves in a space when the people inside realize the available options have changed in a specific and material way. After the meeting, 3 women approached her. The private from the back row, the staff sergeant who had challenged her, a Navy corpsman, 24, who had not spoken during the meeting but had listened with the focused attention of someone filing everything for later use. Victoria gave each of them a card. She told them to take 2 weeks and think about it. No obligation, no pressure. The unit would exist regardless. The staff sergeant looked at the card for a moment. Your sister filed a report, she said. Yes. And they deleted it. Yes. She put the card in her pocket and walked out into the November morning without saying anything else. That was enough. That was exactly enough. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in December, Victoria found a document in her NCIS internal inbox. A single page. No cover note. No routing explanation. The header identified it as an official JAG review, memo classification level routine. The body was brief. It summarized the Shadow Cell investigation. It identified the lead investigator. It assessed the investigation's methodology as consistent with best practices for undercover evidence collection in hostile institutional environments. It noted that the use of analog recording technology had been not only legally defensible, but operationally decisive in a context where digital evidence preservation would have been vulnerable to the rapid destruction similar investigations had historically suffered. At the bottom, a recommendation. Lieutenant Commander Victoria Harmon demonstrated investigative judgment, operational discipline, and personal conduct under conditions that most experienced investigators would not have navigated successfully. She is recommended for command authority over the proposed Military Sexual Trauma Investigations Unit, effective at the earliest feasible date. Signed, Colonel James Hargrove, Judge Advocate, General's Corps. No ceremony, no formation, no speech in front of assembled personnel. Just a document in an inbox from a man who had watched her correct a database error without drawing attention to herself, who had found her in the records room at 2 in the morning, doing the slow work of building a map, who had stood at the edge of a training bay and understood that what he was observing was not the competence of someone who had been told they were competent. She read it twice. She placed it in the physical case file between the chain of custody log for the analog device and the forensics report cover page. She never mentioned it to Hargrove. He never mentioned it to her. When she passed him in the corridor 2 days later, he gave her a nod. Not a greeting, not a salutation. The acknowledgement that passes between people who have arrived at the same understanding through separate routes and do not require the understanding to be spoken aloud to be real. She returned it. They continued in opposite directions. Arlington in December. The cemetery held the particular quality of winter light that came from a low sun moving at a shallow angle across white marble, casting long shadows between the rows. The tourists were gone. Groundskeeping crews worked the far sections, their sounds ambient and distant. Victoria walked the path from memory. 7th row, 14th stone, PFC Lily Harmon, United States Marine Corps, 1999, 2021. Beloved daughter and sister. Marcus Cole walked beside her. He had asked to come. She had said yes. He had driven from the apartment he kept in Arlington, which she had not previously known about, but which, given what she now understood about how long he had been watching Fort Kelton and why, made complete sense. They stood in front of the stone for a while without speaking. The cold was the damp cold of a Washington December, which required a different kind of tolerance than the dry cold of the Arizona desert. Victoria took 3 things from the interior pocket of her jacket. The first was the NCIS Commendation Medal we had received the previous week at a ceremony she had attended and left as quickly as protocol allowed. She set it against the base of the stone. The second was the verdict. The official JAG record of United States versus Raines. The court-martial conviction, the sentence, the full roster of charges, the names of all 6 individuals prosecuted in the broader investigation. She had printed it and laminated it because she intended it to remain legible through whatever weather Section 60 produced. She set it beside the medal. The third was a photograph. 41 women outside Fort Kelton's chapel annex on a Saturday morning in November. Some were looking at the camera. Some were looking at something outside the frame. Some had their arms around each other. All of them were alive, standing in the morning light of a military installation that no longer contained the thing that had been done to them. She propped the photograph against the stone. She put her hand flat against the marble. The cold came through immediately, as it always did. I kept the promise, she said. The words were not loud. They were the completion of something left incomplete for 3.5 years, the closing of a loop that had begun in this row on a rainy April afternoon when she had stood in dress whites over fresh earth and made a commitment to someone who could not hear it, but who had left enough evidence that it could be honored. All 4 of them, she said. Raines, Voss, Mercer, Sutton, the administrative officer, Bassett, the Capitol Hill buyer, all of them. The buyers are being prosecuted. The network is being dismantled. The foreign services have been notified that the acquisition contacts are identified and the program is terminated. She was quiet for a moment. Your report was not lost, she said. They deleted it. Someone accepted $5,000 to delete it. That person is in federal custody. Your report has been reconstructed from backup forensics and is now part of the permanent court record. It will be there as long as the record exists. You did everything right, she said. Cole stepped forward. He put his hand on the stone above where Victoria's hand rested. He was quiet for a long time, in the way of someone not searching for words, but allowing what was true to find its own form. I taught Gerald to build evidence in rooms designed to prevent it, he said finally. Berlin. I was 32 and I thought I understood what I was giving him. He looked at the stone. He paid attention in ways I didn't fully appreciate until I saw what he did with it. He carried that device for 22 years. He gave it to you. Not because you were his daughter, because you were the right person. He moved his hand from the stone. I should have moved sooner on Fort Kelton, he said. When I found her initials, I told myself I was building towards something, and that was true, and it was also an accommodation I made with myself. Both things are true, and I'll carry them both. Victoria looked at him. Without the thread you built, there is no investigation, she said. Without the investigation, the operation continues. You built what you could build, and then you made sure the right person found it. That is what you had to do. You did it. Cole absorbed that without deflecting it, which was itself a form of character. He straightened. He looked at the row of white stones extending in both directions, the honored dead, the people who had served and paid the cost of service in a variety of currencies remembered here in the democracy of identical marble. He saluted. 1 beat, 2. He brought his hand down. Victoria did the same. She held it for the count she had learned at the funeral, the specific count that military protocol assigned to this gesture, and then she brought her hand down and stood straight with the cold coming through her jacket from the December air. They stood for another minute, then they turned and walked back along the row through the section toward the parking area at the edge of the cemetery. The low sun threw their shadows long before them, moving across the grass between the stones. At the parking area, Cole's car was beside hers. He unlocked it and paused. Fort Prescott, Victoria said. He looked at her. Anonymous report came in last week. Cross-flagged it. Young female soldiers, extra training sessions, complaint files not reaching the appropriate review desk. Same pattern. He was quiet. I need someone monitoring from security, she said. Same protocol. 30 minutes from entry. I need someone who knows how to run analog equipment in a modern facility and doesn't leave a digital signature that triggers internal alerts. He looked at his car, at the bare trees along the cemetery's perimeter wall, at the low December sky. I should be somewhere warm, he said. No, she said. He looked at her. No, she said again. You should be at Fort Prescott. He considered this for a moment, then he let go of the door handle. The drive is 4 hours, he said. We can brief on the way. She nodded. She put her hand in her jacket pocket. The device was there. She had taken it back from the evidence archive after the conviction was final, after the case was closed, after the physical evidence had been released under standard post-adjudication protocols. Worn at the corners from years of careful handling. The recessed switch on the side. The weight of it slight but present in a way that felt larger than its mass. She had charged the battery the night before. She did not take it out of her pocket. She held it. Cole got into his car. She got into hers. The cemetery stayed where it was behind them. White marble in winter light. 7th row, 14th stone. The photograph of 41 women propped against its base, held in place by the laminated court record and the commendation medal and the cold that preserved everything it touched. Lily's initials carved into a bathroom wall. A report submitted and deleted and recovered and entered into the permanent record. A device carried for 37 years through the hands of 3 people who understood what it was for a man who built it, a man who passed it on, and a woman who carried it into the only room where it needed to go. Forward. Her father had written that word in the margin of a training manual she found in a box in her mother's attic 6 months after the funeral. Not a direction or an instruction. Just a word written in the margin, the way people write words that mean something during a moment when meaning is useful. One word, no context needed. She drove toward the highway. The device was in her pocket. The battery was charged. 4 hours to Fort Prescott. Somewhere in that installation, an anonymous report had not yet reached the right desk. Not yet, but it would.